Hi, everyone. It's Helen from S&B Deal Hunter. Today we have Stephen Crandall with us, the owner of SC Audit and Accounting Solutions. Stephen's an acquisition entrepreneur who's acquired 7 CPA firms. Very excited to hear Stephen's story today. Stephen, it's great to have you.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me. Always good to meet new people and share my experiences.
Yeah, no, I love how I came across you on Twitter or X. So always love these serendipitous, online meets, and glad we could get your, on this interview. So, I mean, Stephen, let's start with your background. How did you get into the acquisition space? You started SC Audit and Accounting Solutions and decided to kind of grow through acquisitions, which is a little bit different than a lot of the folks I've interviewed who, started acquiring day one. But would love to hear about your background, how you just got into this whole space.
Yeah, so I started my career down with a big firm down in the Phoenix area, and worked for this firm for 6 or 7 years, and also spent a couple of years with PricewaterhouseCoopers. And that was it was an amazing experience. But I had more of a local firm background as well as like a bigger firm background. And I remember to this day, I was working down there, and I really had this ambition. I always wanted to start my own company. And this was like January of 2014. And I went into like what would be like a 6-month review with my boss. And at that time, I'd pretty much made up my mind I wanted to start my own firm. And so basically during that interview, I sat down with him and another one of the partners of the firm I was with, and just let them know that I was planning on just going off on my own. And I really still remember it to this day. The managing partner, he looks at me, so he's like, you know what? So you're gonna go out there and strike out swinging, huh? And I'm like, I guess so. That's the plan. And so I started the company. It was just me at the time. I was going to start providing more or less consulting services, audit and accounting. You see that in the business name. And I did that. And I, basically at first just went around the local community, handing out business cards, starting to develop the business and doing all the little things that everyone would need to do to just get a small business up and running. And I was also during that time very focused on recruiting. That experience I had with PricewaterhouseCoopers showed me that the big firms, what they do is they focus on the people that they can bring into their organizations and the training that they can provide to them. And so I knew that that was going to be really important. So I developed relationships with the colleges and just anywhere I could try to find employees and people that I could bring onto my firm to help me build and grow into what we are today. Quick background story that got me into the acquisitions to answer that is I was just out and about. I don't know if I was walking in the community or just out on my bike or something like that, but I'd had a few other CPA firms that were sending me business at the time. Very busy profession. And so some firms are just not accepting new clients. And so I thought, well, I'm going to just go in and hand out some of my business cards. And this was like February, kind of right at the beginning of tax season. And I walked into this small CPA firm, and when I went in there, I could hear the administrative assistant. She's on the phone with a client, and she's like, "Yeah, Mr. So and so CPA, he's sick, and we don't know his status, and this and that." And so I was like, "Okay," I'm just sitting there. I was like, "I just left a couple of my business cards," and a couple of days later, I get a phone call from this CPA's son, and he's like, "Hey, my dad's in the hospital. He's really sick, and we want to see if you can help us." I was like, "Okay, yeah, sure." I'm like, "I'll come meet him." And so I go down to the hospital where he's staying and just talking to him about his practice and what he was wanting to do. And basically, I made just like a quick little proposition to him right there to say, "Hey, I'll take over your practice and run it for you." And his son looks at him. He's like, "Dad, do you want to like take a few minutes or take a couple of days to think about this?" And his father looks at him and looks at me, and he's like, "Nope, I want to get this done." And basically he puts his hand out, and him and I shake hands, and I just take over his practice from right there. Sadly, he died like 2 weeks later. So I think he knew
Wow.
that he was not going to be alive very much longer. But that's what started this kind of whole idea of me acquiring these businesses. And then from there, I've acquired 7 other practices. We've got offices here in Prescott, Arizona, which is north of Phoenix. Got an office from acquisitions I did down in Scottsdale, Arizona, and then currently working on new acquisition up in Flagstaff.
Wow, I mean, that's a crazy story. I'm curious, before even getting into buying a business, when you first started your business and you were getting things off the ground, what did that look like? Like, how long did it take you? And, how long were you running that business, sort of growing organically before you acquired that first business?
It was about a year and a half. So about a year and a half. And I just did all the things that I think that, small business entrepreneurs need to do is obviously all the basics, setting up your website, setting up all of your email programs, getting your databases in place, putting together my own internal accounting, filing my own tax returns, trying to network, find employees. But, one of the things that I did, I felt like exceptionally well is a lot of networking. And I would find every single opportunity I could early on just to tell somebody about what I was doing. And so I didn't have a lot of work when we first started the business. It's like, okay, just trying to find different things to keep me busy. But when I had downtime and I wasn't doing actual client work, I was out there in the streets just marketing my business, handing out business cards, walking into attorneys' offices, financial advisors, the banks, other CPA firms, and just trying to get my name out there. And, and slowly but surely, that first year, I don't know, I think I was able to make like 50 or $60,000. Basically, I had nothing when I started. It was just me, my wife, we had a couple of kids. And I was like, look, I really want to do this. I think I can make it happen, but we just need to live as cheap as we possibly can. And so we literally lived in like a 1-bedroom studio apartment for like a year, just trying to keep all of our expenses super cheap. I had a little bit of money that I was like using on credit cards, just trying to make it happen, the typical entrepreneur's start.
Yeah.
But after a couple of years and then starting to do some of these acquisitions, things really started to come together. And that's really kind of how I started it.
I love the hustle. I mean, I don't know of many CPAs who are pounding the pavement like you, so that's
Probably not
awesome.
many. And I would get that comment a lot. They're like, oh, wow, like CPA owners just like walking around here, like coming in my office. But I mean, you got to survive, right? Like that's the only way you can do it.
You gotta do what you gotta do. How, you went from making 50, 60K a year to how much after you bought that first business? Was it a pretty big, upgrade for you,
I
or was
remember, I think I calculated it and we basically tripled in size for like the first like 4 or 5 years of my company.
wow.
So we were like tripling our revenue stream every couple of years or every year for like
Wow.
5 years.
And was that majority, attributed to the acquisition, some organic growth, or how would you?
I mean, I kept up with a lot of my marketing and everything, but the big chunks of new business would come in from these acquisitions.
Wow.
So it was like, we would do, did 50 or 60,000 that first year. And then I was able to go up to like, 100 and something, almost 200, and then up to 500, and then 1.5 million, and then just kind of so forth. But yeah, the big chunks of new business came in from these acquisitions.
Wow, that's
I
that's
mean,
great.
but I haven't done an acquisition. I haven't done an acquisition in 4 years, but our company's almost doubled in size since the last time I did an acquisition.
Wow.
But you get to a certain size, I feel like, and that's what's really important. And that's what I thought in my mind. I was like, okay, if I can get to a certain size where I have like this kind of market share, if you will, and if I can find ways to get the work done, then when new people come into town or someone's looking for a CPA, I'm going to have the infrastructure to really go ahead and service that business, that new business that's coming in. And that was a big focus of mine early on. I just wanted to really make sure that I had the infrastructure and the people that could get the work done. And so just as much as I was focused on growing the revenues, on the flip side was I was focused on bringing in new professionals and providing training to them. And when you're doing that, like one of the things that I've certainly noticed is like, as a growing business, you have to run things really lean, right? It's like, okay, I've got excess staff. I've got these people that I'm paying. They're not necessarily busy early on, but I'm growing the business. And then eventually, once kind of those two spheres align, that's when the profitability of the companies, I feel like, can really expand at that point. But I
That's
just knew that the acquisitions was going to put me on the map much quicker than just trying to build organically just by myself.
No, that's a super smart approach to buy the market share and buy all the brand awareness and all of that, and
Yeah.
new customers just come to you. That's really brilliant. I'm curious, how did the integration look like each business you bought? You obviously were really focused on recruiting. Did you feel like it was tough to integrate new clients in? Like, I know a lot of people who want to buy CPA firms often talk about sort of fear of losing clients because, those client relationships maintained with the previous seller. Like, what's your take there?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot of different variables and obstacles that you have to go through. One of the things that I noticed early on is that the staff of these firms that I would acquire typically didn't work out for me. And
Mm,
and the reason is because I had my own staff, and these are people that, I'd brought on that have trained using my software, understood my systems. And so like there's more or less like a situation where when I would acquire a firm and bring on, I tried to keep their staff if I could, but they just weren't as valuable to me because they didn't know our software. They'd been with this firm for a long time, and their pay was way up here, but yet their skill sets was really down here. And I thought, you know what, if I've got my own people that can do this work, I'd rather just use my people to get the work done. And these are people that already know my systems. But I've just found a lot of success just building and training my own staff versus trying to bring experienced professionals from other firms or other organizations into my firm. And that was a game changer for me. And obviously, a lot of the leadership attributes that you have to have, I mean, they must shine in that scenario, because you've got to bring people along and get their commitment and build that trust within your organization. But when I look back on it all, that's our firm. It's like the firm culture, where we've got people that have started their careers with us, developed their careers with us. There's a certain amount of loyalty that you produce when you take that approach.
wow. I'm
Uh,
sure your employee retention is very high then.
yeah, I think it has been, and but I mean, not to say that I haven't had turnover like any other place. I mean, CPA work is difficult, and some people don't really make it. But yeah, like a lot of my key people throughout the years have all stuck around. So those that were successful in this business, I mean, I've had really good retention with the people that are actually working out and helping the company move forward.
That's
Uh,
fantastic.
but I
And how
mean,
did
just go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
no, no, how did it work out with the clients, that you took
Yeah.
over? Was that a
Yeah,
challenge
so
to
it's
keep
always a
them?
challenge. So really each firm was different. And so the situations where I was able to bring on better higher end CPA firms, those ones seem to work out better than others, where it's like the CPA firm standards or the other accounting practice firm standards were not as high as ours. I felt like those where our standards aligned a lot better were ones that would stick around and make it work. I mean, overall, I would say that we were always able to keep probably 80% of the clients, just on average, 80 to 85% of the clients, but we were able to do at least like 90 to almost 100% of the revenue because I had more staff. And
Mm.
so we had a better ability to actually service some of the clients and provide additional services to them. And so that worked out really well. But it is a challenge, especially early on, because it was like my first 5 years taking on like all these new firms. I didn't really know exactly what I was doing. I was learning on the fly. And it certainly felt like anytime we bring in a new firm, like you feel like, it's very overwhelming. There's so much that you have to put into making it happen, especially with a young company like mine at the time, where we didn't have the best processes and the best procedures and kind of everything in place that we have in place now. Um, and that's something that I do a lot of coaching myself right now, and talking to new business owners. And it's really like the focus should really be early on is like the processes and the procedures, because I look back on my first 5 years versus the last 5 years, and I think, okay, if I had the processes and procedures that I have today in place from day one, and I was just more cognizant of the value of that, of those processes, I could be so much further ahead today than I am now. But it's hard. You don't know all these things up front until you experience it.
Yeah, hindsight's always 20/20, but that's
Exactly.
great. No, but that's great insight. I mean, I'm curious, you kind of mentioned firms with similar standards, what would be like the standards you would be looking for or seeking out in these firms that you're acquiring, or what kind of standards do you guys uphold yourself to?
Yeah, I mean, it more or less like, okay, like, I guess in simplified terms, it's like, okay, like if I brought on an accounting practice where the average client was paying like $400 for a tax return and $200 a month or $300 a month for bookkeeping services versus a firm where it's like they're a more well-established firm. They have, been in business for a long time. Their clients are higher end clients when, in terms of like more established local businesses, people that are retired, they really appreciate professional services. And if their average prices are $1,000 for a return and $1,500 for bookkeeping or whatever it might be, like those just worked out better because I just think that they were more appreciative of like the professional service that we could provide to them. And it more or less aligned with the type of service that we wanted to provide as well. But sometimes some of these kind of lower end, they're like, they're more or less like transactional versus like the CPA relationship. And so our business is focused on that CPA relationship, tax planning, providing, kind of a holistic view of your organization, making sure that you understand, all the different elements that need to go into a successful business and all of your reporting requirements, just more in-depth relationships. And it just made a big difference. And so I could tell the ones that were higher end practices, they just worked out so much better for us because that was the standard that we wanted to provide services under versus some of these smaller organizations. They just wanted to get a return done as quickly as possible and for the small, least amount of money. And it's just like, all right, that can work and we can do that to a certain extent, but we want higher end clientele. We want clientele that really appreciate and mold well with our standards.
Got it. And what types of clientele are they? Are they mostly like what size businesses do you generally work
Yeah, I
with
mean, just
now?
a lot of like local, like small businesses. We've got doctors, attorneys, architects, plumbers, restaurants, um, some like, local government organizations, nonprofits. I mean, you name it. We've got a lot of different clients of all different sizes. Typically, like small businesses, like our niche would be like that 1 million to 5 million, some up to like the 10 to $20 million range is kind of what we've typically serviced. And then yeah, and then just your basic local CPA firm services that we're providing.
No, that's super interesting. What and how did you find the other, you mentioned how you sort of found the first deal, but the subsequent, I guess, 6 other deals, how did you source those? Like, how did you come across them?
Yeah.
What did that look like?
Yeah, no, good question. So I remember, so I grew up in the same community. And I remember when I graduated from college, I actually went around this community and I was like trying to find a job for myself. I was like, all right, maybe one of these firms will hire me. And those were some of the same firms that I went back to and I approached after I started making acquisitions. I was like, hey, I'm in the business of acquiring firms, and if you're looking to retire, let me know and maybe we can make a deal. And so a lot of it was word of mouth and just making connections with other firm owners. And then there were also some that you'd find on, like, there are like broker sites where they're listing CPA firms that are for sale. And so I've kept a pretty good eye out for like the firms that are for sale and what they're looking for price wise to purchase the firm. And so I just get to know the owner and interview with them. And if they liked me and they thought that, my vision of what I could do for their clientele was going to work, typically we'd be able to make a deal.
That's great. And how did you finance these deals? The first one, I guess, pretty unfortunate the seller, passed away after 2 weeks, but how did you finance that transaction? What did that look like for the subsequent
Yeah.
deals?
Now, good question. So every deal was pretty much different. So I've had some where I went to the owner and said, hey, I want you to finance it just yourself. Like, I'll just pay you based on the revenues of the firm. And some of them would set up a deal where it's like, okay, like I'll carry like a 5-year note. I had another one where I was like, okay, I'm going to give you $50,000 down, and I'm going to take out a note, and then I'm going to give you like a couple balloon payments of, I don't know, it was like another $75,000, like 2 years in a row. And then they would finance a note. And so, when you're dealing owner to owner, I mean, I think that's the cool part about some of these like smaller acquisitions is you can get the owners to help you finance it and kind of work a deal that basically would work out for both of you. I've had some where I've done SBA loans, larger SBA loans. Others where we've not only have we financed the practice, but we bought the buildings. I think that's really important. Like if you can find real estate that you can kind of pull into into your acquisitions, I think that's, can be a really good thing for your like future retirement plans as well. And so I've actually been able to acquire some of the buildings along with some of these acquisitions as well. And just traditional bank financing. I know right now, like I'm working on a deal where the bank will finance it. I don't even know that. I think for the operation, like the actual business itself, they're not asking for any money down. And usually all that they want is for the owner to carry like 20%. And so bank says, okay, well, if it's $1 million deal, we'll loan you $800,000, get the owner to carry 20%. So I'll take out a note with the owner, maybe it's like 5 years, 10 years, for that 20%, and then I'll borrow the other 80% from the bank. And then that's how some of these deals will work. And I think right now on the one I'm working on right now, they are maybe 6% is maybe the interest rate. So it's not bad actually, considering. I
Yeah.
think it's less to finance the business than it is the real estate right now.
Yeah. No, that's super interesting. How did you structure the deals that did come with real estate?
Yeah. So I mean, there's a couple different ways. One of the deals that I did, which is the building I'm in now, it's close to like $1 million building. And it is what I did, and the owner was pretty cool about this, but I said, look, I will structure like a purchase option with you. And basically I rented the building from him for like 4 or 5 years. And then at the end of that 4 or 5 years, like this additional money that I would pay in rent would go towards purchasing the building. And so I think that I had like over $100,000 that I had saved up through this purchase option. And so when I exercised the option, I had my down payment or close to my down payment after that 5 year period of time. And then I was able to go to the bank and say, hey, I've got this down payment that's going to go into the equity. And then, I had some of my own money that I put into it. So, because usually they want 20%. So you got to put in 20% to buy the practice or the building, I should say.
Super interesting. So almost like a rent to own situation, if you will, a little bit.
It is, yeah. In a lot of ways, that's exactly right. Yeah. So you've got a certain amount of your monthly rent payment that's going towards this purchase option, and that adds up. I mean, so I think that it's attractive for both the buyer and the seller, because the seller knows like, okay, they're going to want to exercise this option to purchase this building because they've got all this money that they've saved up. Otherwise, you're going to potentially forfeit that money. And so the seller is basically saying, okay, I know I'm going to sell the building. And then as a buyer, you're able to basically save up for your down payment that way.
No, that's really smart that you did that. And I'm curious, why did you go sort of SBA versus conventional? Like, what's your take on, those two options? And, in terms of like order of preference, would you prefer going seller note, SBA, conventional? You sort of run the whole gamut of financing options.
Yeah, I know.
I'd love to hear the pros and cons of each from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, each one, it's more dependent on your situation. Like right now, I'm in a situation where it's pretty easy for me to finance because, I've got money to put down if I needed to. And it's like I can get better interest rates. So just your traditional financing right now makes more sense for a more established business. But early on, like it's hard to get it's hard to get financing because it's like you may not have that much money available. You're like more or less like trying to say, okay, like banks probably aren't going to work with you. You know, you don't really have very good profit and losses. And if you don't have a lot of money ready to put down, it does make it really difficult with the bank. But there is SBA financing, right? So SBA is like more or less for newer owners that are trying to get financing, and you might need a larger amount of money. And so early on, I think it, you know, makes more sense to either go SBA route or try to get the owner to finance. And so the way I did it was more or less like, okay, I just wanted the owners to finance those first couple of deals. And then I did an SBA. And then after that, it was like, okay, I'm 5 years into this. You know, now I've got an established business. I've got the, you know, financials to support a loan from a bank. And then when you go to the bank and get a loan directly with them, it's just a little less restrictive. SBA loans are difficult because they want everything on you, right? They want to have all these different projections. They want to have, you know, they want to put a lien on your house. They want to do all these different things that make them fairly restrictive. They're fine. I mean, you can get your start that way, but after a while, you're like, okay, like, you know, I'd prefer not to have such a restrictive loan. I would rather, and they have all these other requirements that go into reporting and this and that, versus more or less your traditional bank financing. You know, they're like, all right, we've got the practice or a building. They just finance directly against those practices and that's it. So they're a lot more straightforward, a little easier to get done. Versus SBA, it's months and months to get it done because of all the paperwork that they want. And then
And how did the terms look like on sort of the conventional bank financing compared to the SBA loan for you?
yeah, I mean, typically the conventional is like usually like 10 years, right? So they'll do a 10-year note. Again, like the 20% they want the owner to carry, but 10-year note, pretty straightforward. You know, you're paying it off over that period of time, you know, 5-6%. The SBA, like at least the one I did was a 10-year note as well. Kind of similar thing. They wanted the owner to carry back some of it, but that one was a 10-year note. But it's a variable, right? So when the interest rates go up, my interest rates go up, you know, my payment goes up.
Yeah.
And then, you know, like with some of the more traditional bank financing, these are just your non-variable loans. They're pretty straightforward. So you know your payment's going to be the same all the time, no matter what happens with the interest rate. So it's a fixed rate.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I'm curious because a lot of people have trouble, getting 100% seller financing or majority seller finance deals. It seems like you've had, a fair bit of success on those. How did you sort of convince a seller to finance the entire transaction for you?
That's
Was
a good
that was that
question.
was that easy? Was that hard? Is it yeah, no, curious to learn more.
Yeah, like looking back on it, everything's situational, right? And so if you've got a seller that like that first one I did, it's like, okay, like, the guy he knew that he had really no options. It's not like he could wait and say, oh yeah, go get bank financing, right? And so he knew that, all right, I need to make a deal, more of like a handshake deal. And so that's the reason that one worked out that way. But then the second one I did, I mean, he was just a really cool guy and he trusted me, and so he was like, all right, I'll stick around. I'll help you guys for a couple of years and yeah, give me this much down and then take out a note and then pay me these balloon payments. And he just trusted that his practice would produce enough revenue so that he knew he would get paid. And he did, and so I think it worked out really good for him to have it that way. But it's just all really negotiation. So a lot of times you just have to go to a prospective seller and lay out a plan. And if they like it and they trust you and they think that it'll work, then they'll do it, right? Because from the seller standpoint, not only do they get to sell the practice or a building, but they also get to structure it in a way. Well, first of all, they get the interest, right? So they are the bank, and so they're making more money because of the interest rate. And so that's attractive. And then the other thing from a tax standpoint is, as a seller, so if you go do bank financing, the seller has to pick up all the income on the date that transaction closes. And so their income tax rate's a lot higher. But if they do more or less like a seller finance, they might be bringing in that revenue over like a 5-year period of time. And so that would reduce their tax rate because they're not having to recognize as much of the sale all in one single year. And so that's another way I think you could sell that idea to a seller. Say, hey, you can pay less taxes. So less taxes, you get the interest off of the financing. And so really it can be a win-win. It's just a bigger risk for the seller.
Yeah. And did you have to personally guarantee those often, or?
No, I don't think I had any personal guarantees on those
Love
at
that.
all. So they just had to trust that we were going to do it,
Yeah.
and pay them back. And, it's like, look, I mean, I'm a CPA. I'm in this to make money and create goodwill. Like, you have to sell them on the idea that you are going to make sure they get paid back, and they have to trust that that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I know it's not easy to do that all the time, but I mean, there are certainly sellers out there that are willing to do it.
No, that's smart. And were those mostly off-market deals, did you say? Were you able to make that happen? Or did you approach the broker deals and also get, convince them to offer sort of like majority seller financing?
Yeah, usually like the broker deals, it's probably a little bit harder to get like seller financing.
Yeah.
But honestly, you can work it out anyway. Even with the broker deals, I've had a few, because not only have I done the 7 acquisitions, but I probably had another 5 or 6 that I inquired about and started working towards to try to make it happen, but they just didn't go through for various reasons. So, you've got to shoot your shot, and, some of them are going to land and some of them are not.
Yeah. No, that's
Yeah.
interesting. I'm curious, with the ones that didn't go through, and maybe this ties in kind of to my next question, but what are some of the most important things to dig into when you're diligencing a CPA firm, and what caused some of these dead deals?
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's timing,
Yeah.
right? Like the timing's got to be right. And you've got to make sure that it's a good fit. And you got to make sure that, okay, like, is this going to be the right practice in the right area? Because I've got multiple offices in different cities, right? And so I got to make sure that, I've got the staffing in that city. I've got to make sure that the owner is going to stick around if I need them to stick around in certain cases. Timing wise, like, are we trying to get a deal done during the summer, or are we trying to get a deal done right before tax season? I had one that I thought was going to be a really good deal for us, but we were pushed up right to the beginning of tax season. And, she was like a little hesitant. Like she was okay with with the seller financing, but she wanted like 15% interest on the seller financing.
Wow.
Because she was a little, less, I guess she was a little more risk adverse, I guess you could say. And she's like, all right, well, if I'm gonna have to finance some of it, I want a lot of interest that comes off of it. And I was like, that's just not gonna happen.
Yeah.
And that deal kind of died based on that. But we were kind of pushing up towards tax season. I was like, all right, I don't know how long it's gonna take to actually get a deal done if I'm trying to go finance it. And I don't want a deal to go through right in the middle of the tax season, just because you're so busy and no one really has time to try to broker a deal. And when you're that busy, that one fell through. I had another big one. So my office down in Scottsdale, I had acquired a small practice in 2019, and I opened this fairly large office down there, and it was going to accommodate probably like 20 people, the office. And so I had a big deal that was like that I was working on, and then 2020 comes around and COVID hits. And I'm working with the bank. We're 5-6 months into trying to get this deal done, dealing with COVID and everything else that was happening at the time. And basically at the end of the deal, the bank came back to me and they're like, we're just not going to be able to get this done. And my agent was like, I've gotten this exact same deal done, many other times, but because of the circumstance with everything else that's going on, like, we're just not going to be able to do it. And so that was painful, because that was kind of like the big idea, right? I had this big building ready to go, a nice big practice that I was going to be adding to it. And for that to fall through definitely hurt. And so you have some wins and so you have some losses, that's for
Yeah.
sure.
It
That
could
was a big
definitely be
loss.
painful. No, wow, that's crazy. Are
And
you mostly?
I put a decent chunk of money because a lot of these sellers, they want you to put earnest money down.
Yeah.
And I don't know, at the time it was like almost like, I think it was like $25,000. I was like, all right, I'll put this money down. We're gonna buy this thing, we're gonna make it happen. And I was like so confident it's gonna go through.
Wow. And those are kind of non-refundable.
Yeah, you're losing your money on that. Yeah.
Yeah,
So if they don't make
wild.
it go through.
I guess with the real estate, when you buy a new business, are you moving all the offices to one location? I mean, you're in a few cities, but in each city, are you one location? You kind of integrate them that way, or how are you thinking about
Yeah,
things?
I mean, it's basically one location for each city. Although here in Prescott, I've got two locations because this is our hub, So I've got, like I said, like we're close to 25 employees here. And so we started growing out of the building that I'm in now. And I actually just opened up a new office because I needed all the extra space. And so had to kind of expand there. So we've got two offices here, but really it's just based on growth. So if I have an office location and we start to grow in that certain area, then it's like, okay, might be time to start looking at bringing on more space to have our people available. I don't do a lot of remote work, although it's available to our people. But what I would say is that I don't know, like at least for my firm, like we all have like this really good like tight knit firm culture.
Yeah.
And so people, even though they would be eligible to work from home, they just want to come to the office,
Yeah.
you
I
know?
I totally hear that. I feel like there's starting to be a little bit of a resurgence of, in office work now. So, and there are
Yeah.
people that prefer and get more done. So
Yeah,
that's
I mean, and I don't know. I mean, I guess I've been in situations where it's like if you didn't love the firm culture that you're a part of, like I'd just rather stay at home and just get my work done from home. But if you're part of a great like community and a great firm and just a great organization where you enjoy the people you're working with and you're able to, I don't know, just be yourself and get your work done and just enjoy the people around you. It's like, yeah, you want to come to the office, you want to spend time there.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious, you rebranded everything under sort of SC audit and accounting.
Yeah.
What was the reasoning behind that? Like, was that sort of something you thought through? Like, am I going to keep all these separate or actually like roll them into one?
Well, I mean, so we do a lot of tax work, interestingly enough, but you look at the name of the company, like when I originally started this business, like I thought it was just going to be me just providing consulting services, like audit consulting and like accounting services. And so like that was just the name of the company. So it was just SC Stephen Crandall Audit Accounting Services
Love
Solutions.
it.
And it wasn't supposed to be what it is today, but it turned into a brand, So everybody calls us SCAA, like that's kind of our acronym, SCAA, and or SC Audit. I've kind of gotten different variations of it, but that's become our brand. And so it eventually just more or less took on like a brand name locally. And so it was like, no, this is our firm. This is the organization that we're going to operate under. So when we acquire a business, it's going to become SC Audit Accounting Solutions.
Got it. No, that makes sense. I'm curious, you mentioned you're kind of on a 4-year acquisition hiatus after buying
Yeah.
7 companies. Tell us more about that. What's prompting you to also work on, more deals now? What happened during those 4 years that made you sort of stop looking?
Yeah, I mean, well, I told you about the Scottsdale deal.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I was down there working on that. So during COVID, I was able to move down there. And so I was able to live there. And so I was like, all right, I had management staff up here and kind of the infrastructure up here just to sustain itself. And so I was working down there at the Scottsdale office, trying to get that up and running. I wanted to kind of mimic the same size organization that we had here. But then COVID hit. And so I tried to make it happen, but there was just so many challenges as we all had, not saying that mine were any worse than anybody else's, but so many challenges like staff getting sick or somebody wasn't available. And you're just like, how do you build a team, with
Yeah.
people can't make it to the office and this and that, so very challenging time. And eventually I just said, you know what, like rather than continue to try to push the envelope down there, I was like, I'm gonna try to cut my costs and try to just build the firm down there more organically. And then so I decided to move back up here to Prescott. And then basically what happened is, well, as you know, so during COVID, like people or shortly after, all these people from these bigger cities started moving into more like smaller rural areas. And so the growth of our community just started to really take off.
Wow.
And so I was getting really good clients, people coming from California, people coming from New York, people coming from Chicago, everybody wanting to move here. And so I was getting really good clients. And so I didn't even need to acquire any practices. And so it was like, all right, I'm just going to focus on the organic growth. And so I just moved back here, tried to cut some of my costs in the other areas that I was in, and said, we'll just try to grow organically. But I mean, that was, such a good move, because during that time I was like, all right, here's our firm. We've got lots of clientele, we've got lots of new people. We just need to focus on better processes, like intake, capturing our time from the things that we're, from services that we're billing for, and just refine all these processes, right? And just getting everything that, good, solid, structured business should have in place, like putting all those procedures in place and documenting things. And the profitability of my company at that time just shot way up. It was like, all right, we had the business, didn't need to acquire any more businesses at that point. It's like, all right, we're going to be more profitable by not acquiring now. And it just shot way up. And so the whole time we're developing all these processes. And now I was like, all right, well, if I find the right deal that I can just plug into the current processes that we have, then that's going to be even more successful. And so that's what got me. And I've always kept my eye out for like deals, even during that 4-year hiatus. But it was like trying to find the right one and making sure that the timing was right for me and my staff. But yeah. So we're kind of back at it again.
Oh, that's great. And what size deals are you looking at now compared to, when you first were acquiring? Are they a lot bigger, or do they kind of max out at a certain point?
Yeah, it depends. I guess I haven't done like major deals, but all my deals have been like 500,000 to $1 million, about that. And so, like for us, the idea here was like, okay, we could basically take on another 500,000 to like five or to 100 or to $1 million of revenue with mostly our existing infrastructure.
Wow.
And so that was kind of the idea. Like, we're growing anyhow, but like I feel like we still have some capacity where it's like, okay, we can actually get more done and bring on new work. And so it's like, just basically saying, okay, we've got all the infrastructure, we've got the offices, we've got the people that have been trained now, and I've got people that are looking for work. So now's the time to like bring on that new work. And it's great because if you can bring on that new work and your cost doesn't go up, then, a good majority of all the new work can just go right to the bottom line, I suppose.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic.
So,
No, that's super interesting. And I'm
I mean,
curious.
it's just a good place to be in, it's like
Yeah.
you go through this progression of this kind of super fast, like hyper growth period. And then you settle down, focus on the processes. And then it's like you get everything in order that you need to be profitable and make sure everything's going to work well. And then it's like, okay, this next deal, I'm expecting that to be so much smoother than any of the other ones and just be so much more of a, profitable endeavor for us.
No, definitely. I'm curious now too, what's your day-to-day like now that you acquired some businesses, you have offices in multiple locations. Like how often are you traveling between cities? What are you focused on now?
Fortunately, with all of our, wonderful technology, I don't have to travel a whole lot. I try to keep my routines pretty well in order. I
Love
love
that.
my office here. I've got all my people that help me get stuff done right here. My whole admin team's here, all my assistants, all the people that help me do my job are here. So I try to spend as much time as I can here. But I certainly do. I do travel, so I'll go down there. I'll spend a couple days in our Scottsdale office. I'll meet with certain clients, work with the staff, or if I'm recruiting somebody in another office, I'll go meet with them. But we do a lot of kind of video calls, video conferences, shared, screen shares, like teaching people how to do work just through like screen shares and whatnot. And so the technological standpoint from COVID, like that helped my business a ton too. Because now, like what happened is like basically all these people that I had to meet with before, they got used to not having meetings. So that freed up a bunch of my time. So I have to meet with all these clients all the time. It's like, okay, now just come drop your stuff off. We've got portals, we've got, all these online, resources that we can use. And so everyone just got much more comfortable using these online resources. And so that really freed up a lot of my time. But I'm a busy guy still. I still do a lot of the work, but I also have, now that I'm, to this phase of my business, I've got enough people that can help me just basically send work out the door. So somebody asked me that question. They're like, well, aren't you getting overwhelmed as you continue to grow? I said, not necessarily, because if you look at like this, like if you have like a piece of pie, right? I'm now a smaller slice of the pie versus when I had a smaller business, I was a much bigger slice of that pie. And so my, time restraints and requirements were much greater. Now it's like you start to maybe marginalize yourself a little bit from a day-to-day standpoint. And now I can just focus on building the business and recruiting and helping the team manage the company. And I work with other managers in the company. And so I'm spending more of my time on the business versus in the business.
I was just gonna say, that's the dream.
It's the dream, yeah, and I'm still working towards that. I know I still have a lot of room to grow in that area, but that's been a big focus of mine, is how do I kind of pull myself out a little bit from the day to day and focus on just building the business. Recently read a book called Buy Back Your Time from Dan Martell. I don't know if you've heard of him.
No, I'm writing it down now. I'm gonna get it.
Yeah, and it was, well, like I read it because like that's where I'm at in the tenure of my business. Like, all right, now I want to find ways to spend more of my time on the most valuable activities that I can possibly provide, as well as spending time on the things that I enjoy personally.
100%. I always think about time leverage, and it sounds like I need to read this book.
I would definitely recommend it. He's got so much great material in there, but he talks about like hiring executive assistants, people to help you go through your email, talks about, how to delegate certain tasks, how to create playbooks. And these playbooks are essentially just documenting processes and recording these processes. And that way, when new people come on, it's like, all right, you don't have to spend staff time training them. They just go to a video, or they, go to a training manual, and they can kind of learn all these things on their own without requiring staff time.
Yeah.
And so that's been a major focus of my company now, is like documenting all of our processes and trying to kind of bring that up to speed. And I think that's going to be a game changer. I feel like I still have a lot more work to do in that area. But once we really get a lot of these procedures and processes all documented and recorded and put into place, that's gonna make a huge difference. And in fact, I think that all small businesses should really focus on that from day one.
I totally agree. Or else you're just playing catch up, you're spending more time in the business. And no, I think that's very, very smart. I'm curious, what's the goal? And for you, is it to keep running the business, make more acquisitions, sell the whole thing one day? Are you
Good
playing
question.
it as you sort of go
I mean, it's a good
along?
question. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't mind working hard and continue to do what I'm doing. I've always kind of looked at this as like more of like a legacy firm. Like I always want to have a part of it, or maybe like some family members having a part of it. If I eventually do sell, I want to sell to other employees that have come up and, kind of worked their way through the ranks of the company. I don't necessarily want to sell to an outside organization, but, who knows? Who knows? I could get some offer that I can't refuse one day.
Yeah, who knows what the future holds? I love that. I guess, any final sort of words of wisdom, especially for, first time business buyers out there?
Yeah, I mean, number one, just like I was saying earlier, when you first get started, don't just waste your extra time. Like spend that extra time, especially when you're young, you got that energy and you've got the ambition. Spend that extra time working on the business. Even when you're not working in it, work on the business. Work that 40, 50, 60-hour work week if you have, especially early on. Make deals that really align with your firm values and your own personal values. That's very important. And then structure processes, like really, like everything that you do from day one should be documented, written down, refined. Just captured in some way so that you can continue to kind of build on this information, this knowledge that you've built in the firm, and then continue to make sure that you always address those processes and try to improve them at all times. I just felt like my first couple of years, I wasn't focused on that at all. I was just focused on growing. But if I was more focused on the process and capturing data and capturing information and, just really focusing on that like detailed level of procedures, I'd be so much further ahead, but that's where I'm at now. I've learned from those mistakes. And so that's what I'm focused on now, is just making sure that, we are, just refining those processes and procedures all the time.
No, that's great advice. I guess just final question for me. I know we're at time, but if people want to reach out to you, whether it's, to work with you guys or just to, learn more, where can they find you?
Yeah. So info@scaasolutions.com. That's the way you can email us and get in touch. Our website, scaasolutions.com, has all of our just content on there, all of our firm information. And then I'm on Twitter, c.Stephen Crandall, CPA. So X, as I would like to call it now.
Yeah. Awesome.
And so I can certainly be reached. And I'm actually starting a podcast myself called the Business Bar, which I'm pretty excited about. We're really in the process of recording. So we've got like 4 or 5 episodes. Well, we're going to try to release an episode a week on, I don't know if it's going to be Mondays, but we record on Mondays. We'll put that on YouTube, start to kind of promote it. But basically, so I've got this, my business partner, if you will, or the podcast guy that I'm working with. He worked at this little resort that I like to go to, and he worked at the bar. And he's just such a fun, outgoing guy, but he had started a business in the tech world. And so him and I get together and we're always like talking business, and the conversation just flows really freely. And so we thought about this idea of like trying to get out there and do more podcasts, and he was going to kind of help me, but it turned into us doing our own podcast. But basically, we just talk about business and processes. And one of the things that we're doing is we're reading a book every week. So we read a book or listen to a book. So it's a book a week, and we talk about the book in our podcast, and then talk about different business ideas and concepts around that book. And I give some tax advice in the podcast and all that. Sorry about that. So anyhow, we haven't gotten it fully established, but we're recording and doing all that. So if you have any suggestions, let me know.
Yeah, no, I love that. I'll be on the lookout for the podcast. Very, very excited for it. That sounds I love that concept.
We call it the Business Bar. So I don't know, we're just getting started, but it's been fun. You get those conversations, or you work with certain people, and when it's fun and you're laughing and the information's flowing really well, it's something interesting.
Yeah, 100% agree. Well, look, Stephen, thank you for your time. I know we're over, but really, really appreciate your time today. Excited to share this, and I'm sure everyone is gonna find this super valuable. So thank you again.